I'm Scott Corfe. I'm a director in the economics team at Public First. If you've not heard of us, Public First is a public policy consultancy. We do a lot of opinion research, economic modelling, a lot of policy analysis. A big part of what we do is helping organisations, companies quantify and articulate their impact. So we work with a lot of technology companies like Google. We've done some work for Microsoft. We've got a report out today on the impact of Eurostar as it expands routes into Frankfurt and Geneva. But a lot of what we did earlier this year and towards the end of last year was looking at Sunderland and the impact of all the smart initiatives in Sunderland. And this is a really interesting kind of impact study because, well, and you will see in the slides that I'm going through, just sort of the breadth and the range of the impacts that we've managed to dig out in the analysis. And this is sort of gathering data from various sources across Sunderland and also layering on top of that some additional economic modelling to go from some output data. So what does it actually mean for outcomes? What does it mean for health benefits? What are the business productivity benefits from increased broadband connectivity, for example? I'm trying to keep this presentation concise. As an economist, I could do 100 slides and 100 charts. I'm going to try and boil down the key facts. And this slide deck isn't going to cover all the facts in the report. So I suggest going and having at least a skim through the report to get some more insights into what's happening in Sunderland. So just at a glance, what's happened in Sunderland over the past decade? Really quite a lot. So £110 million of external funding has been brought into the city since just 2010. There's been an 80% decline in broadband connectivity black spots over a 5-year time horizon. So really dramatic decrease in connectivity black spots, increase in access to high-speed broadband. There's been a big increase in the number of business startups in Sunderland, and in particular tech startups. So one thing we did as part of this analysis was look at companies' health data, looking at what kinds of businesses are registering within Sunderland. And what we saw in that analysis was we now have 270 tech businesses in Sunderland, which is up from 108 in 2018. So more than doubling in the number of tech businesses. I still think there's a bit more room to go in terms of going from businesses are being started up to how do you grow them, and I'll come on to that at the end. But this is really sort of encouraging signs from quite a low base to quite strong growth and in the right sectors. These are the fast-growing, high productivity sectors of the economy. And on productivity, what does increased access to full fibre broadband mean? Well, it means quite a lot in terms of business productivity. So one thing we did was draw on some of the literature around what does broadband connectivity mean for business performance and business productivity. And based on that, we estimated an increase of £70 million per year in terms of business productivity from increased connectivity, from increased broadband speeds. And again, this is something that's just going to become more and more important over time with the rise of businesses centered around AI, the rise of data centers. Connectivity is just going to become more important, not less important. I mean, that's all quite economics-y stuff, but there's also loads of interesting stats in the report around health benefits and some really interesting use cases. So we did quite a few depth interviews looking at how technology is being used in adult social care, embedding technology in homes to help people live more independently. So using things like smart speakers and sensors to allow people to live by themselves or live with relatives rather than going into a care home. And also to detect whether someone's had a fall, which is the biggest cause of accidental death amongst the over 70s. So if you can use technology to reduce that, you can have a substantial benefit for the NHS and also individuals' lives. And then there's a load of interesting stuff around data usage, which I'll come on to a bit more later. But just to give one stat there, 670 additional pupils identified for free school meals as a result of better usage and analysis of data. For all this to work, you need the right networks. So a big part of Sunderland's journey has been that £60 million investment in full fibre broadband. You've now got 46,000 properties that are ready for full fibre services. Really quite fast speeds, so 5.5 gigabits per second is the maximum broadband speed now available in the area. And it's really important that broadband's affordable for households. It's no good having this connectivity if the average person in Sunderland can't afford it. So one sort of encouraging stat that we identified in our depth interviews is you've now got 30 competing ISP providers within Sunderland. So there's a lot of consumer choice to get the right products, the affordable products, and ensuring that as many people as possible can benefit from that connectivity. And the council is using connectivity to drive efficiency gains. So a big part of what we did was try and understand how is Sunderland City Council using Internet of Things solutions to deliver more efficient and enhanced public services. So just to give, and there are some more examples of this in the report, but just to give a bit of a flavour of the types of benefits that are being realised using sensors to test water for Legionella rather than having people go to the site all the time. So there's travel time savings, those personnel use time savings, fitting Internet of Things sensors onto lifebuoys. So you know if the lifebuoy's been stolen, so you can replace it more quickly. So there's a safety element to this, and there's being able to respond to an incident more quickly element to this. I thought there's some really interesting stuff going on in the social housing stock around using damp and mold sensors. So you can fit sensors onto windows to understand, is that tenant ventilating their house properly? Are they keeping the windows closed or open? Can you encourage that tenant to change their behaviour in a way that reduces mold and damp as a problem? So identifying a problem before it exacerbates and encouraging tenants to change their behaviour. And then also using Microsoft Power Apps and data to better grit the road network in winter and identify where the roads need to be gritted. So I talked a bit about the use of technology in adult social care. So we've got 6,900 people on the adult social care caseload that are using assistive technologies. A big part of what we did was using some of the data on what technology is being rolled out and who's benefiting from them, trying to understand what does this mean for health outcomes. So based on some of the academic literature on these technologies, there is scope for Internet of Things solutions in homes to reduce the risk of fall by up to 40%. So really substantial reduction in fall risks, which, as I said, is the biggest cause of accidental deaths amongst those aged over 70. And we estimated that within Sunderland, that reduction in fall risks can save the NHS £170,000 per year in terms of people going into hospital, care costs, any treatment costs. And I think the next sort of layer, and this is how this is being rolled out in Sunderland, is using AI and AI cameras to improve outcomes in the city. So you can use AI cameras to identify areas at risk of crime or a crime event that's about to happen. But there's also this application here around you could use AI cameras to identify people that are suicide risks. Big problem in the northeast, big problem in Sunderland. So we estimated that use of AI cameras could reduce the number of suicides in Sunderland by 6 per year. And as I said before, it's not just about these technologies, these sensors. Is also about the data infrastructure and doing better things with data and getting more insights from the data that the council's gathering and holding. So I mentioned the 670 additional pupils identified for free school meals, but just to give a couple of other benefits of improved data infrastructure, you've got £500,000 of further benefits realised through additional data insight and data partnerships. And just to quantify these pupil benefits, you've got £1.1 million of support delivered to schools and families via pupil premium as a result of this better data infrastructure. I sort of touched on it earlier, but infrastructure is not a solution in itself. It doesn't mean anything if households and businesses can't afford the broadband connectivity, or if households don't know how to use their technology. So one of the stats that we identified in the research, drawing on some of Sunderland's own digital inclusion work, is you've got 30,000 residents that have never been online. So you can have access to full fibre broadband in your house, but you have no idea how to get connected up. How do you bring those people along? And again, there's quite a lot of interesting initiatives going on the ground in Sunderland to ensure that for this digital excluded group or those without as much digital skills, they can benefit from this. So you've had over 1,500 mobile SIM cards being issued for free through data banks in the city. And you've got 1,000 plus devices that have been saved from landfill for a donated devices campaign. So this is giving people access to the data in terms of the SIM cards and also the devices they need to get online. And there's also a load of great stuff going on in Sunderland in terms of improving people's digital confidence. And going back to the sort of the business startup scene, I mentioned the 270 tech businesses that you now have in Sunderland. That's more than a doubling of what was the case in 2018. And these productivity benefits, I think going forward, there's real scope for this to increase further. So we've identified, another consultancy's identified £440 million of additional productivity gains over the next 15 years from increased broadband connectivity. And one thing we also looked at in the report that's not on this slide is looking at things like free Wi-Fi that's now in the city centre in Sunderland, which we estimate is driving increased footfall and increasing retail sales by 2% in Sunderland. So beyond tech businesses and initiatives to encourage tech startups in Sunderland, things like improving Wi-Fi access in the city centre is actually benefiting non-tech businesses, so increasing footfall, increasing retail sales. And just on the skills side, one thing we also gathered data on and spoke to a few people on was how do we upskill the younger generation on digital skills in Sunderland? So again, some really substantial numbers here. Over 7,500 young people have been reached by the Sunderland Software City's Digital Careers Programme, and over 400 teachers in the area have been engaged in professional development since 2022. So a lot being undertaken in Sunderland to ensure that the younger generation is engaging with digital skills, is potentially showing an interest in starting a tech business in the future or getting a career in ICT. And as Liz said, this is just what's happened over the past 5-6 years or so. Where does Sunderland go over the next decade? So some of the things we identified in our report are autonomous vehicles. So there has been autonomous vehicle sort of trial services in Sunderland with the SAM shuttle. I think that there's some real potential there as we roll out autonomous vehicles go forward, and it becomes an actually established technology. So one thing we identify in particular in the report is use of autonomous vehicles along the port corridor, and the potential there to a combination of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles to reduce CO2 emissions by 34%, so a third reduction in CO2 emissions from that technology. Electric vehicles in general is going to become a big thing in Sunderland. So over the next, as it is across much of the country, we estimate a 10-fold increase in electric vehicles over the next decade. Embedding AI into more and more public services. So identified use of AI cameras, for example, to reduce crime, to identify suicide risks, to analyse and interrogate all this data that's being gathered. That's only going to accelerate over the coming period. And my last point here, perhaps, which I sort of alluded to, is I think the next phase for Sunderland on the business front is going from, you're seeing some encouraging increase in business startups, but how do we now go from startups to scale-ups? So one of the things we identified in our analysis is you've got that increase in business registrations, but actually if you look at the company's accounts data, there aren't many of these businesses that have got lots of employees. So, and I think one thing that came out of our depth interviews within Sunderland is there is a bit of a funding gap here. You've got really good initiatives to encourage people to start a business. There's access to bank funding if you're a large and established company, but there's that sort of missing middle problem. So how do you help these smaller businesses scale up, and how do you help them to access the capital they need to scale up? So I think addressing that's probably a key policy focus for the area going forward. And sort of a final slide to end on. How is Sunderland unique, and what lessons are there for other areas? So one thing that really came up quite strongly across all the stakeholders we spoke to in the project was Sunderland is different from other cities in the UK, and in particular it's different, I think, in a couple of areas. So one is it's taken a really holistic approach to smart cities. It's not just, and one thing that really came out was a lot of places are thinking about these technologies, but they're doing it on quite an ad hoc and bitty basis. So they'll do an initiative in one area, but they're not thinking about how you can apply this in another. So it might be they're focusing on adult social care, but not crime. Whereas Sunderland is thinking about health, crime, Internet of Things solutions, free Wi-Fi, broadband, and how do you sort of package it all up together into a coherent narrative around smart cities. So I think that's the first area where Sunderland came out as quite different from elsewhere. And the second is around sort of this joint venture approach. So working closely with Boldyn, Microsoft, City Fibre to have a model that is sustainable and ensures that these initiatives have continued momentum rather than being ad hoc and drying up. So there's this continued progress. I think it's quite clear that you've got strong civic leadership. So sort of a CEO that's committed to this, people like Liz that are really committed to this. So it is really sort of a core part of what the council's doing, and sort of thinking a lot about the people within Sunderland and ensuring they benefit from this. So complementing connectivity with efforts to increase digital inclusion. One thing I didn't mention is that Sunderland has done a lot with its own staff to get all staff that weren't online, and to reduce digital inclusion within its own workforce. So setting a model for the rest of the city there.